Hello everyone, I'm Jay Joshi and welcome to the 39th episode of Learning Java. Today, we'll be learning about the abstract keyword and method overriding. So, what is method overriding first of all? So, you all know what method overloading is, right? In a class, when we have multiple functions on the same name that have similar functions, then it's called method overloading. And this is useful if to reduce the complexity of the program because we don't want to have multiple methods. So thus we can have multiple methods of the same name but with different parameters performing similar functions. In the same way, there's something called method overriding. So, as you know, method overloading is a way of implementing polymorphism in Java. In the same way, method overriding is also a way of implementing polymorphism in Java. So, you know what inheritance is, right? So, inheritance is related with method overriding. So, to know inheritance, you essentially want to know overriding, method overriding, and to perform method overriding, the only way is to know inheritance. So, you know what inheritance is when a child class inherits attributes from a parent class. These attributes are variables and methods. Now, for example, instead of directly just taking a method from the parent class into the child class, you want to take the method, but you want to redefine the method. You don't want to perform the same function, but you want to perform a similar function. So, in that case, what will you do? This is called method overriding. So now that you have a brief idea about method overriding, let's have a look at what this abstract keyword is all about. So an abstract keyword is a keyword which you can use with the class or with the method. So it's just the word abstract all in small letters and you put it before a class or a method. Now let's see first of all what an abstract class is. What happens when you put the word abstract before a class? So an abstract class is essentially a conceptual class. It cannot be instantiated. Now, what does this word instantiated means? It means that objects cannot be created of that particular class. So let's say I have a class B. So I cannot create an object B obj is equal to new obj. I cannot create an object of this class. This is the use of an abstract class. So if you don't want a class to be instantiated, that is, you don't want objects to be created of that particular class, you can declare it as abstract. And this is useful in many cases when you later on write your programs. Now, what's the use of an abstract class? Well, an abstract class is used in inheritance and it provides a root for a group of classes that are used in inheritance. So, what does this essentially mean? Now, let's say you're trying to inherit from a parent class. A child class is trying to inherit some methods from a parent class. And the parent and the child class wants to know what will inherit. And it doesn't essentially have the similar functions with those particular methods. So, an abstract class is a class that has an abstract method. So if a class has an abstract method, then the class needs to be abstract. And even if a class doesn't have an abstract method, it doesn't need to be an abstract class. So an abstract class may or may not have an abstract method, but an abstract method is always in an abstract class. So whenever you have an abstract class, there may or may not be a chance that there's an abstract method in it. Now the use of this abstract method is, so let's say you have a class B and this is an abstract class which has abstract methods. We'll see on the next slide what an abstract method is. Now this will have some method. Let's say this has a method fun and this is an abstract method. Now a class A which inherits, this is the child class, which inherits from the parent class B, knows that it has to override the function fun. Why? Because it's an abstract method. So the rule with abstract methods is that abstract methods need to be initialized in the child class. If they are not initialized in the child class, then the child class also cannot be instantiated. And the child class need not have the abstract keyword because you want to instantiate it. And if you want to instantiate it, you have to initialize and write the content for an abstract method. Now let's look at what an abstract method is. An abstract method is basically a method which has no body. So let's say I have a method void, I'm not putting an access specifier, you don't need to, void fun, and then So this is how you will normally declare a method, and there'll be some content over here. But in abstract method, you put abstract over here, abstract void fun, and you don't have any of these brackets, and you have a semicolon. So it's just one line. It's only the function prototype. And this can have parameters also. It doesn't really matter. So you have an abstract void fun with a semicolon. A normal method won't have a semicolon, but an abstract method has a semicolon. And this doesn't have any body. And abstract methods are usually in the parent class. So now the child class knows that it has to define this method fun. So the child class will actually have the method fun, which will be non-abstract, and we'll have a body in that function. So the use is the parent abstract class will tell the programmer that in the child class this method needs to be redefined. So this is the use of an abstract class and an abstract method. Now, you can read over here that in a superclass, which is the parent class, there may be one or two methods that may not have a method body. And these methods are called as abstract methods. Now, if a class, as I mentioned, if a class contains at least one abstract method, it should be declared as an abstract class. And the abstract methods of an abstract superclass must be defined in its subclass. And if they are not defined, then the child class also cannot be instantiated. That is, we cannot create objects. So this is what abstract method and abstract class is. Now, when you have two or more functions of the same name in the child class and the parent class, then it leads to something called method overriding. So if you have class members also, so if you have variables or methods of the same name in the child class and the parent class, it leads to method overriding. So method, that's the basic of a method overriding, but there's still a little more to cover in an abstract method and class that you better understand. So you can see we have an abstract class over here, public abstract class. You have to put this abstract keyword, and this has an abstract method. So you can see it has a semicolon and no, and this is a non-abstract method. This has no semicolon and this has a body. So this is how an abstract thing works. Now these are some of the properties of an abstract class. I've already covered all of them. So it must be declared as abstract and cannot be instantiated. A class that is declared as abstract, even with no abstract methods, cannot be instantiated. A subclass of an abstract class can be instantiated if it overrides. Overrides is the important term. So both the functions of the same name are in both the classes. If it overrides all the abstract methods by implementing them, and a subclass which does not implement all of them cannot be instantiated. Now, overriding, as I mentioned, when there are two or more variables or methods of the same name in the child class and the parent class, it leads to method overriding. So when there are two or more functions of the same name in the child and the parent class, then the methods are overridden and the variables will be hidden. So you cannot access those variables. And to access those variables, you need to use the super keyword. And these methods are overridden just like how we have function overloading with the same name but with different parameters. But in this case, they have the same parameters and the same name and everything is the same. So how does the compiler differentiate between the function of the child class and the parent class? Well, so in a child class, if you call a function fun, right, then it will call the function of the child class. But if you want to call the function of the parent class, you have to use this keyword super.fun. Then this will call the function fun of the parent class. So this is how you access both the functions. And this is again useful to reduce the complexity of the program because you don't want to have multiple methods. Now, if you don't want your class to be inherited or overridden, it's the same thing, then what do? Then you can use something called a final keyword. So if before the class, instead of abstract, you have the word final, then this class cannot be inherited. So if you want to prevent the inheritance of a class, you have to use the final keyword. And this is essentially useful for security measures. Now, let's say you don't want the whole class to be unable to be inherited, and you only want some specific variables or functions. So you can, before a function or a variable, you can put the keyword final, and those methods or variables won't be inherited. So that's what this final keyword does. It prevents inheritance. Now, as I already mentioned, how do you access these overridden methods? Well, you use the super keyword. Now, you might ask, how will I access the constructor? So let's say in the child class, you when you create an object, the when you create an object using the class name of the child class, the child class constructor gets called. Now to call the parent class constructor, inside the child class constructor, you'll have to use this super. So inside, and this will be the below will be the rest of the code. So inside the constructor of the child class, you will be calling the constructor of the parent class by using the super keyword. And below that, you can have the normal initialization of the normal constructor. So this is essentially the thing. Constructors are not inherited. That's why you have to call them again. And the default constructor is obviously executed of the child class, and constructors are called using the super keyword. Now, one important thing to note over here is that in the child constructor, if you're calling the super constructor, it's your wish if you want to call it or not. The super line, this super line has to be the first line inside the constructor function statement. It cannot be the second, third, or fourth line. It has to be the first line. That's how Java is, because you always have to call those variables first before of the parent class before you call the variables of the child class. So this is why this is useful. So you in the child class, you can call the functions of the parent class, you can call the constructors of the parent class, and this is very useful to reduce complexity and for code reusability. So that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for watching, and if you have any queries, doubts, or suggestions, you can mail me. My email will be in the description down below. And thanks again for watching.